Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, hello. Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game. And today I'd like to talk about my 5 biggest regret cards from the standard format change. Now, what I mean by regret cards are cards that I think had lots of potential to be amazing or powerful inclusions in the meta, but never really got the chance to shine because they didn't have the right kind of deck archetypes or cards with synergies or just the right meta environment to ever take off. So perhaps with a couple more expansions and a card here or there, these are the kinds of cards that could have gone absolutely crazy and been maybe even centerpieces for certain kinds of decks. But instead that will never happen because the standard format will arrive and these cards will be phased out into wild format. Now certainly they may still get to explore some of those fun things in the wild format in the future, but we'll never see them at the highest levels of play in tournaments or at BlizzCon, for instance. So these are my regret cards. In no particular order, these are the 5 cards I really wish had more time to be explored and used, and we got to see them in action. So first off is a Druid card called Druid of the Fang. I think this card had a lot of potential. I've included it in some budget beast decks in the past, but there's never really been a high-level Druid beast deck, despite what appears to be numerous attempts from Blizzard to create one. This card has tons of potential as a 5-mana 7/7. That's kind of like a Fel Reaver with no downside, and as we know, Fel Reaver is a very popular 5-drop. In aggressive decks, so I could have seen a world where Druid of the Fang was a successful big body for 5 mana that you're not putting a lot of resources into and fits well with your deck that has other beast synergies. But this came out in Goblins versus Gnomes. There weren't enough Druid beasts. There still today aren't enough Druid beasts. So this card is just inconsistent and overcosted at 5 mana. But as more and more beasts are introduced to the game, and perhaps even Druid itself gets more beasts, I feel like Druid of the Fang could have been a very good 5 mana tempo play as that solid 7/7 body. So unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get to see a world where Druid of the Fang is a particularly good card. Instead, it's just a below average card. Up next is actually another Druid card, also from Goblins versus Gnomes. This time, though, it's the 6 mana Mech Bearcat. This minion is just so fantastically designed. It's a huge body, which Druids love to have. It's well costed as far as stats are concerned. Like, those are fantastic stats for 6 mana. And it has a really cool effect. Whenever this minion takes damage, add a spare part card to your hand. So it's kind of a card engine of sorts. It's generating 1 or 2 spare parts, worst case scenario, perhaps even, 5 or 6 in a best case scenario. But this card never got played. It's just a little bit too susceptible to big game hunter. Druid mech decks, which were a thing for a little while, were much more aggressive, so this one was too slow to really thrive in a Druid mech deck environment, particularly when there's some pretty good neutral mechs as well at the 6 mana cost. So this one never took off, and I really wish it had, because it's just such a cool design, both visually and value-wise as far as the card is concerned. So I wish it had more time and more mech synergy with Druid in the future to get to shine. But now that spare parts are going out the door, mechs are going out the door, Mech Bearcat itself is going out the door, of course, we're never going to see this card at high-level play, which I think is a real, utter shame. Up next is the only Naxxramas card on my list, because for the most part, Naxxramas cards have been played pretty successfully in a variety of different decks. Almost every card, short 3 or 4, is a very popular meta card. But this is one that I think had a lot of potential and never had a chance or the right cards to make it good. Stone Skin Gargoyle is a 3 mana 1/4, which is not an exciting stat line. You want your 3-drops to be at least a 2/4 and even ideally a 3/4. So that was the first hurdle it had. But the effect is pretty neat. At the start of your turn, restore this minion to full health. So the idea is using like buff cards to make these stats better. And then if you're able to keep it alive for a few turns, of course, you're just generating value every single time it heals itself. I think the problem is there just weren't any decks when this card came out, or even to this day, that relied on buffs and board presence enough to make it good. Priest certainly seems like a deck that works the best with Stonestone Gargoyle because you actually get buff synergy and healing synergy because it counts as a heal, of course, when it restores to full health, so you could proc things like a Northshire Cleric. But not enough classes and not enough cards benefit from either of those things. There are very few healing synergy cards where you get benefits when a minion is healed. In fact, Priest is the only one that comes to mind right now. If other classes had that and had some good buffs and ways to preserve their board, I could see this card being pretty good in like a zoo-style list where you're trying to get solid minions out. I mean, compare this to something like an Imp Gang Boss that's a 2/4 and generates 1/1s. It kind of does the same thing, right? If it's healing itself, it's in a way generating some extra stats every turn. But it just never worked out. It never had a chance. The right cards weren't in place, and this goes down in history as really one of the few bad cards from Naxxramas, which is, to me, a shame. I think with a couple expansions, there might be a deck out there that finally made this card work, and that's something I'd very much like to see. The next card of my top 5 is a Priest card. Oh, that's not the name of it. It is this one, Shadow Bomber. This 1 mana 2/1 is an aggressive Priest card, which is particularly unusual right there as a part of its design. It's really like a super Leper Gnome, a Leper Gnome that does 2 damage to the hero when it dies. This one is a 1 mana 2/1, much like Leper Gnome, but it does an instant 3 damage to the enemy hero and yourself, of course, which is a small trade-off for so much damage at the beginning of a game. This would be perfect in a hyper-aggressive Priest deck that is used to race down your opponent's health total while using probably some passive things like Holy Nova to kind of accidentally heal yourself while still doing damage to your opponent and restoring your board. So Shadow Bomber to me had a lot of potential, and I've often thought about ways to include this in a deck that made sense and make it work. Unfortunately, I never found one, and I don't think the Hearthstone community at large did either. So Shadow Bomber has really just been relegated to the sidelines since its release. I'm sure it's been in a few decks here and there, but it really has never thrived in a popular meta deck, which I think could have changed in future expansions as more 1-drops and early game cards that worked with Priest were added to the game, and as Priest got some more burst damage perhaps. Shadow Bomber might have been a good card somewhere along the way that was pretty fundamental to opening up a strong hyper face style Priest deck, and I'm sad that we never got to see that because I think this is a pretty cool card that would have been very fun to see in action as you're just racing opponents down to 0. So much for Shadow Bomber. We will miss you. Thanks for your service, what little you provided. And I have one more card that I wanted to discuss that really, to me, feels like the biggest waste of the first year of the Wild versus Standard format split. And that card is Gazlow. This 6 mana, 3/6 minion was really all about the 2 things that Goblins versus Gnomes introduced, which was mech synergy and spare parts. So whenever you cast a 1 mana spell with Gazlow on the board and all spare parts are 1 mana spells, you get to add a random mech to your hand. So you get spare parts. When you cast 1 mana spell, you get mechs added to your hand. So this felt like kind of the ultimate, oh my gosh, I could stick all these things in a deck and Gazlow will be the ultimate tool to make those things work. Instead, Gazlow didn't really work. It was hard to make him fit because your deck is either too slow or too fast. The spare parts weren't generating value at the right times. It just required too much to fit together as a puzzle. So he never took off, and that's a shame because the raw potential of this card is so cool and neat that you get like a seemingly infinite number of mechs added to your hand, that he can generate absurd kinds of late game value. And I can just imagine, like, what if there was a rogue deck we missed where you concealed Gazlow for a couple turns? Just instead of a miracle rogue getting spells, what if you got cool mechs? And as more active mechs were added to the game, as each class got new 1-mana spells perhaps, it feels like there might have been some deck in the future where Gazlow suddenly fit and all the puzzle pieces came together and he was the ultimate cog or draw engine machine or late game answer that just made the deck work. Instead, Gazlow will be retired and we'll never actually see him thrive in a real and good deck, which is a shame because he's a popular Warcraft character, a recognizable name, and a legendary that somebody got out of a pack or crafted that will now be probably mostly going to waste in the Wild format instead of being seen on the stages of BlizzCon in a very popular and prominent deck. So we're sad to lose you, Gazlow. I think there's an alternate dimension somewhere where you defined a deck, and I'd like to see that. And there you have it. Those are my 5 biggest regret cards of the format change. These were the cards I wish had more time and had a chance to shine, but alas, we're going to lose them. So if you had some cards you wish you could have seen thrive, be sure to leave a comment. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts as well. I'd like to know what your regret cards are. And just to clarify, I'm not saying that these cards are totally dying or going to waste. I think that the Wild format will thrive and people will be playing it, but the very top pros and the best decks in the world probably, or the most popular decks in the world, I'll say, won't be including these anymore because standard format will become the default. So don't cry if you've got these cards in your collection. I don't think they're going to waste forever. We'll see them again someday, but maybe they just won't be the best cards in the game. So thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.